All right, guys, so I stumbled across this clip, a rare clip of MSNBC's Joe Scarborough actually telling the truth to Al Sharpton about how the Democrat Party, particularly woke white liberals, are out of touch with so-called people of color in this country, okay? And I found this clip to be fascinating as, again, he's telling Al Sharpton this. Somebody that, in my opinion, really is one of the issues in the black community because of his leadership, his failed leadership, and he's in bed with woke white liberals, right? He actually agrees with a lot of woke white liberals, but for whatever reason, Joe Scarborough is going to defer to him on this issue as if he knows anything. But the reason why they're talking about this is because the Democrats are projected to get blown out in the midterms, evidenced by the fact that Joe Biden's approval rating is literally the lowest in history for any president at this point in their presidency, okay? If it's not the lowest, it's damn near closest to the lowest, okay? I've seen polls with his approval ratings down in like the 33% range. And this is happening even though the mainstream liberal media spent a year kissing the guy's butt, okay? Nothing but fawning and favorable coverage for the guy. And this has created a problem, right? The problem is so bad that the mainstream liberal media, again, is finally telling the truth and trying to get the Democrats to wake up when it comes to over-relying on identity, racial politics, and wokeness. Telling them that, hey, you know what? The people that you're trying to appeal to don't really like this all that much. So with that being said, before I get into this clip, I just want you guys to know that if you like my channel, you want to support my channel, you can do so using the links in the description below. You support the Patreon, you support the PayPal, you support the merch. There are multiple ways to support the channel if you would like to do so. So with that being said, let's go ahead and roll the clip of Joe Scarborough telling Al Sharpton the truth about so-called minority voters and how woke white liberals are out of touch with them. Take a look.
If Bill de Blasio is running in parts of New York City, that's going to look a lot different than in Virginia. And Rev, I want to talk to you about a real blind spot that a lot of Democrats in the Beltway in D.C. have that you don't, and you've been warning about. But let's just say it right here, and let me say it slowly for my Democratic friends in Washington, D.C. Black voters are more conservative than you are. White woke leaders in Washington, D.C. Hispanic voters are more conservative than you are. White woke leaders in Washington, D.C. Asian American voters are more conservative than you are. White woke voters in Washington, D.C. And they're more conservative on crime. They're more conservative on education. They're more conservative on, quote, these woke issues. Get off of Twitter. I'm telling you. And Rev, if you look at Biden runs against 15 progressives. Biden's the only moderate. Biden wins. We've said it time and again. Eric Adams runs as a conservative. He wins Brooklyn. He wins the Bronx. He wins Staten Island. Surprise. He wins Queens as a conservative, as a centrist Democrat. Can you please? I know you've done it a lot.
No.
Can you explain to white woke leaders? Can you explain to them that they're not only losing white dudes in the upper Midwest, they're losing people of color?
They're losing people of color because they really don't get the people of color's life. If you are living in a city, in a neighborhood that is inundated with crime, and you act like that is not an issue, you've already lost me. That is an issue. Yes, we must deal with policing. I've been out front of that. But you cannot ignore when 12-year-old kids who's somebody's niece and neighbor is killed, and you act like that's a non-issue because you're too elitist to live on the ground. We don't want to be manipulated by right-wing elitist billionaires or by left-wing guys that don't understand our life on the ground, that is living in fear of crime, that is living as a result of inflation that is killing us. Many parts of this country, we need gas to go to work. These beltway elitists, these limousine liberals here in New York, don't live in the real world, and blacks have to, and browns have to deal with the real world every day, and we don't sit in crowded subways reading left-wing or right-wing propaganda.
Yeah, so I don't really know why Joe Scarborough is deferring to Al Sharpton on this. I'm not necessarily sure if Al Sharpton is the guy I would be deferring to when discussing the issues with the Democrats, because he's a part of the issue with the Democrats. But what he's saying is most certainly true, and it's showing up in the poll numbers as well for Biden that are dismal, okay? I mean, listen to this. He has a 24% approval among Hispanics, right? With 54% disapproving. His numbers among Black Americans, he still is above water with 63% approval, but his numbers have fallen almost 20 percentage points since last April. Now, when it comes to Asians, I couldn't find any real solid numbers when it comes to his Asian support, but I do have some anecdotal evidence, and I'm telling you guys, I have quite a bit of Asian friends, particularly Indian friends, okay? And Indians are pretty conservative, right? I mean, they're basically closet Republicans, right? And none of them like Biden, right? None of them like Biden, okay? Because they're all about the money, right? They're all about business. They're all about more conservative economics, right? So with that being said, I'm assuming that his numbers with Asians aren't doing all that well either. Not only that, it's not just so-called minorities that Biden is doing bad with. He's just doing bad with other people in general, because his poll numbers have failed among all demographics except college-educated women, right? Which is, again, the only demographic that has become more democratic. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that that probably happens to be the most wokest demographic as well, too. So, I mean, this guy is just failing across the board. But again, what he's saying is right. Is that so-called minorities are more conservative than what the Democrat Party is currently pushing, where the Democrat Party is currently at. Now, let's break that down from a policy perspective, because Democrat policies, I would argue, especially particularly during the pandemic, have really hurt so-called minorities, even though Democrats claim to be, pro-minority. Okay, let's take a look at, for example, the lockdowns. Hispanics. A lot of Hispanics work in the service sector. And who has the lockdowns disproportionately affected the most? The service sector, which means they have affected Hispanics. A lot of Hispanics have suffered from these lockdowns. Okay, and when speaking of lockdowns, Democrats closing up schools, not allowing in-person learning. Who does that disproportionately affect? People who can't necessarily afford to send their kids to get special instructions or tutors to make up for the fact that they're not learning in person, right? And that has driven a lot of so-called minorities, especially Black people, to say, hey, you know what? Screw it. We're going to homeschool, okay? Because my child is not learning with this social distance learning going on that's been pushed on them by the teachers' unions and the Democrat Party. Okay, let's talk about crime, because we have a massive crime crisis going on in this country. Okay, Democrats supported defund the police during 2020 after the whole George Floyd stuff. They got on board with that, especially the progressive wing of the Democrat Party. The establishment wing got on board with it as well too, because they thought at the time, oh, it was the cool thing to do. Lo and behold, these cities start implementing these policies. Okay, these woke city councils following the National Democrat Party and the progressives start doing this stuff. They start cutting their police budgets. They start rolling back on things, not supporting their police officers, actually being hostile towards law enforcement. And then on top of that, you have these progressive DAs that are being elected and funded by liberal billionaires like George Soros that are implementing policies that is effectively catch and release, okay, where they're allowing criminals to run these cities. They're not arresting them. They're not charging them. They're not sending them to prison. And the result of that is obvious. You have historic crime. You have historic murders, historic violence, okay? Because these criminals are running these cities and these neighborhoods. And who is disproportionately being affected by that the most? So-called Black and brown people. The same people that Democrats claim they love. But you know what? No. We have to have these policies in place because of woke, progressive criminal justice reform, okay? This is what the Democrat Party is pushing. Let's talk about the economy, because I think one part of this video in which I think Joe Scarborough is a little off is he talked about, well, Biden ran as a centrist Democrat. And I'm not necessarily sure if that's the case. I'm not sure if you can call yourself a centrist when you're basically calling for open borders, right? But he's most certainly governed like a progressive. I mean, as soon as the dude got in office, he decided to pass a $1.9 trillion stimulus package that we simply did not need, okay? All signs pointed to us having a good year of growth and a good economy in that year, 2021. We didn't need a stimulus. But again, Biden wanted to do a stimulus. He wanted to spend more money, okay? And because of that, what has that led to? It has led to historic inflation. Inflation that has disproportionately impacted people who don't make a lot of money, who are at the lower part of the income bracket, right? This is the same guy that promised, I'm not going to raise taxes on anybody making less than $400,000 a year, right? Now, while he may not have done that on paper through the marginal tax rate increase, he did do that through inflation. He's effectively raised taxes significantly on those who are at the bottom tier of the income bracket. And who is that disproportionately made up of? So-called black and brown people, okay? Those are the people that are hurting the most under the Biden administration economically. Those are the people that are hurting the most under the Biden administration when it comes to education. Those are the people that are hurting the most under the Biden administration when it comes to crime. Now, to be fair, everybody's hurting under the Biden administration, no matter what color you are. But I'm just saying, don't sit here and try to tell me about how the Democrats are supposed to be, you know, pro people of color, when every time I look across the board, their policies have just been terrible for so-called people of color. Okay, they've been terrible. And a lot of stuff they've been pushing on so-called minorities and so-called people of color comes from the far woke left. Okay, again, like progressive criminal justice reform. Okay, like this stuff they're pushing in schools. When it comes to exposing kids to the whole gender ideology stuff. You think Latinos/Hispanics, which a lot of them identify as Catholic, you think that they're going to get on board with that? I don't think so. You think blacks, especially Southern black people who are very, very, very religious, you think they're going to get on board with that? I don't think so. Not to mention all the other like random woke stuff that they tried to push on so-called minorities, right? Like, for example, trying to call Latinos and Hispanics Latinx, right? They overwhelmingly don't like that, okay? Trying to lump black people in with everybody else says like, oh, they're part of LGBTQ, they're people of color, okay? They don't like that either. A lot of that stuff comes from the woke progressive left, right? They've given into that. Okay, all the spending they've done, they've given into the woke progressive left. Now, the question is whether or not this is actually going to matter or show up in the polls, okay? And with that being said, I don't know. Because, look, historically speaking, when it comes time to vote, right, so-called minorities tend to just line up and vote for Democrats because the racism boogeyman comes up, okay? The Democrats start screaming at the top of their lungs, Republicans are racist, right? And for whatever reason, it just works. Every election cycle, it works. People just, well, you know, I don't like what the Democrats are doing, but those Republicans, the Democrats say they're racist. So therefore, I got to vote Democrat because of racism. Now, again, will the racism boogeyman work this time around? Come to midterms? Probably not, right? Because, I mean, historically speaking, you know, Democrats are supposed to get blown out. Okay, now, 2024, that's a whole nother question. Okay, will it work in 2024? We really don't know. So with that being said, I mean, you know, I think what Joe Scarborough here is saying is correct. A lot of these so-called minorities are more conservative than woke white liberals. But again, woke white liberals and them screaming racism at the top of their lungs, the identity politics, it might not necessarily work for them when it comes to poll numbers in terms of how they actually feel. But when it comes to actually going out there and voting, it still seems to work for the Democrats. But again, that could change. That could change. I'm just saying, until voting patterns and voting habits actually change, there's no reason for woke white liberals to be in touch or to actually care about the fact that so-called minorities are more conservative than them. Because at the end of the day, they're still going to line up and vote for the woke white liberals. But hey, like I said, it could change. This could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Because again, Biden is doing terrible on literally all fronts, okay? And again, with that being said, there's a lot of people that are waking up to the woke scam that is the Democrat Party. So we'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a black conservative perspective. Peace.